So another question, and it comes from Mark Eyre, who is a consultant and author. Mark Eyre.
So when push comes to shove, will you support fracking or not?
Ruth Davidson.
We believe that local authorities should be able to look at the planning of this, but actually we think that we should have a mixed energy policy, and that involves non-traditional gas extraction. We have the best safety regime anywhere in the world that we developed in the North Sea for getting gas out of the ground. It's a low-carbon energy fund. We've got 65,000 people that have just been laid off from the northeast, some of whom can be used in this, and we think that as long as you have the best safety rules in the world, it can help contribute to our energy mix. So yes.
Willie Rennie.
No, absolutely. I think we need to start meeting our climate change targets. We've set some of the best climate change targets in the world. Some of the world-beating climate change targets were made here. But in the last 4 years, we've never met them. And what we shouldn't be doing is taking more carbon out of the ground. We should be investing instead in advancing renewables, which Ruth Davidson's government
but just let's pause for a thing, because that, Willie Rennie, as you well know, is not what delegates to your conference said a couple of weeks ago. They voted to lift the current moratorium, the temporary ban on fracking. So why the flip-flop?
Well, in our manifesto, it will be clear that we are not in favour of fracking. The policy committee of the party...
Some of your party members must be pretty fed up with that.
Well, we can have a discussion about our internal machinations, if you like, Glenn. But the party...
So it doesn't matter
policy,
what they say?
Well, if we are having a discussion, I'm quite happy to talk about that, but I would rather talk about fracking.
So you've overruled them?
Well, I'm the leader of the party, I've set the policy. I don't want to advance carbon-based technologies, energy generation, any more than we are doing just now. I want to invest in renewables. I want to meet our climate change targets.
Yeah, but how can we trust you on that? Because the Liberal Democrats have a bit of a credibility problem ever since going into coalition and ditching the pledge to scrap tuition fees. How do we know when you say no fracking, you really mean it?
You ran the UK government energy department. We gave it the green light.
Well, Glenn, we're not going to make that mistake again.
We made it once, though.
We're not going to make that mistake again. We are prioritising renewable technologies. That's what we did in the Department of Energy at Westminster.
Okay.
That's the priorities for the Liberal Democrats, because we want to meet our climate change obligations.
Let's hear from David Coburn, please.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, they closed Long Annet Power Station. Now we have to rely on a lot of renewable energies, some of which are not reliable. When the wind doesn't blow, how do we generate electricity? So wait for the lights to go off not too long in the distant future.
Rubbish.
We have a lot of cheap coal underneath us, and we have a lot of cheap oil. Let's use it. I don't see why we should have expensive energy which pensioners can't afford and steel makers cannot afford.
No environmental or health concerns?
I do. I think we should use the latest technology to clean up the coal and also oil. We should use high technology to make sure that those fossil fuels emit the least possible pollution. That is important. But we cannot just simply switch off and leave the real world. I mean, if you listen to Patrick Harvey...
Well, we're about to listen to Patrick Harvey.
Well, if you listen to Patrick Harvey, you'll, who is...
Who'd like to hear from Patrick Harvey? Thank you.
Who is the dandelions, what Roundup is. Let me just put it this way.
No, David, you've had your go. David, you've had your go, and I've introduced Patrick Harvey.
The reality which governments around the world have finally come to acknowledge, though they're not yet doing enough about it, is that the fossil fuel age is coming to an end. You don't have to like that. You don't have to have chosen it. You don't have to have been, campaigning on this issue for years. It's a reality. And the mantra of maximum fossil fuel extraction, which these parties all support, is not even keeping people's jobs safe. So the challenge for us is to invest in the alternative. We've got far more fossil fuel in the ground globally than we can ever afford to burn. So we need to be investing in the alternative.
Shouldn't we be looking at this as part of an energy mix, given that we are now no longer burning coal in Scotland, and given that the North Sea industry has shed so many jobs, some of which might be able to pick up new work in the fracking industry?
A great many of the people working in that area can see positive, long-lasting, secure futures from renewable energy, from electricity storage,
but they need
also
jobs
from
now.
oil and gas decommissioning. We're already at risk of losing oil and gas decommissioning jobs to companies in other countries. We should be securing those jobs here.
I'm going to come
Fracking is an absolute no from the Greens, but I do hope that the Scottish Government are willing to say the same thing.
Well, we'll come to the SNP and Labour in just a moment. I want to bring in a few thoughts from the audience before we do that. Gentleman behind you then.
Surely an increasing number of countries across the world are banning fracking. There's Canada, France, Germany, Bulgaria, many states in the USA. There's loads of research to show how damaging it is, not only the carbon gases that were already there, there's also leakage of methane. There's loads of research on this. Surely people are running scared when Grangemouth say they might close down and people see that as, you know, a loss of votes. The sensible way is surely ban it and move on.
OK. Katie Duggan.
I think people at home will expect their politicians to follow the evidence, to follow the science. And the science tells us that the last thing we need when we face the travesties of climate change is another fossil fuel. So now that we have the power in Scotland to ban fracking, the Labour Party would use it. No ifs, no buts, no fracking with Scottish Labour.
Very briefly, now we're bringing Nicola Sturgeon.
Olivia talks about following the evidence, and the evidence has shown that not only in America has fracking reduced energy bills for homeowners by a half, it has also brought down carbon emissions because it's a much lower carbon technology than things like coal. So, you know, I think it's up for local authorities. They should be able to decide on their own planning whether they allow it or not. But as long as we have the safety regime in place, as long as local people are happy with that happening, then this can absolutely help bring down fuel poverty in this country.
The evidence that you rely on is slashing the renewable energy budget in the UK. We've devastated the industry. I think that is a shame for the Conservatives after the good work that we did in the coalition to advance that.
You were fine with stop fracking in the coalition.
You two can finish this outside. I want to hear from Nicola Sturgeon. Given the concerns that have been raised, why don't you match Labour's ban?
Well, there is no fracking allowed in Scotland right now.
It's not banned, though, is it?
Well, let me explain the position. There's no fracking allowed in Scotland right now because we put in place a moratorium. And my view is that unless it can be proved beyond any doubt that fracking doesn't harm our environment, doesn't harm our health, doesn't harm our communities, then to answer Mark's question, no, fracking shouldn't be allowed at all ever in Scotland.
Well,
why we've got the moratorium in place is because...
advertising to decommission for fracking.
Is that true? Are you advertising for decommissioning jobs in the fracking industry that so far doesn't exist?
One of the things we're looking at in the moratorium is what would be the impacts in terms of decommissioning, just as on the impacts of health and environment. But why have we got a moratorium in place?
Up the mess, Nicola.
Why? Perhaps what we're trying to do is show how expensive and difficult it might be to do that. But one of the reasons we've got the moratorium is because we have a situation where the UK government have given licences to companies to frack in Scotland.
Yeah,
so
and you're going to have the power over licensing
exactly.
devolved to Scotland.
Well, we insisted on no more licences being granted until we get that power. But unless we've got the solid evidence before we were to move to a ban, we'd end up in court.
Are you frightened that INEOS or some other big corporation takes you to court?
Well, I don't want to end up in court. I want to get the evidence in place so that we can take our decisions on that basis. But there is no fracking. There is no fracking allowed in Scotland right now. And if there is any suggestion at all that it harms the environment, there will never be fracking allowed in Scotland as long as I've got anything to do with it.